American Football Stories is brought to you by Coach Paint. Coach Paint is a great tool that allows us to add graphics to player highlight clips similar to the graphics you see on TV. Coach Paint offers the ability to clearly tellustrate video while increasing retention of information in a shorter amount of time. Up your game with Coach Paint today.
What time is it? Game time! It's gonna be special. They gonna talk about this forever.
Welcome to American Football Stories.
Puts his head down, crashes and spins, and dives. Touchdown!
Bringing together the many perspectives that make up college football in the NFL.
Football is one of the greatest sports ever invented.
From players and coaches.
Believe, baby, believe, baby.
Hey, we playing to win right here, fellas.
To the front office and scouts.
The public is finally beginning to catch up, but they don't even know half the truth.
Us against the world, let's get it.
Your hosts, Robert Parker and Nick Knudsen, bring you American Football Stories.
Welcome to the American Football Stories podcast brought to you by Coach Paint. My name is Nick Knudsen. My co-host is Robert Parker. Today is February 23rd, 2021, and we'll be talking UCF Knights football with our guest, Jeff Sharon of the SB Nation site Black and Gold Banneret. Thanks for joining American Football Stories tonight, Jeff.
Nick, Rob, it's good to see you guys. Thank you so much for having me on. And American Football Stories, boy, is UCF certainly one.
Oh, yeah. I've been fired up for this episode. I'm really fired up that you agreed to come on here because there's a lot to talk about in Orlando right now. But let's start. I want to do this because I'm from Florida. Rob's actually a Gator fan too, so we follow the scene.
That's all right. Nobody's perfect.
we follow the scene in the state of Florida pretty closely, but I want to do this for someone in Colorado who doesn't know a thing about UCF, right? Like, or just follows it loosely. I want to be able to go through. So we'll go through really from the beginning here with UCF and explain really how incredible the last 5 years in particular have been around the program. But first off, with your blog, Black and Gold Banneret, give me a little background on that. You started that and did you sell it to SB Nation?
Yeah, we started actually in 2015 as an independent site, and I started with zero budget. I'd done a couple of freelance, gigs, covering UCF sports for a while, and I kind of thought for a second. I was like, well, why don't I just start my own site? Like, I already know how to do all this stuff, right? So instead of working for somebody else, I said, well, I can do it my way, the way I wanted to, and so that's exactly what we did. And I got a couple of friends of mine, Eric Lopez and then Brian Murphy, to join on. And I was like, I don't have any money to pay you. And they're like, no problem. So I was like, all right, well, let's start a podcast and let's cover not just UCF football and men's basketball, but all sports. Cause we really pride ourselves on covering all the sports that UCF has. And that's kind of how as students, we kind of got our start, was covering things like softball and baseball and volleyball and tennis and soccer, and it slowly but surely grew. We actually started the site in 2015, right when UCF was having a winless season, and on the football field, and hired a new athletic director. We covered that. Hired a new football coach. Covered that, and then all of a sudden, 2 years later, undefeated football season, and SB Nation comes knocking, and they're like, "Hey, you guys got a really nice site over there." I was like, yeah, I know. And the rest is history. And here we are.
All of a sudden, people are interested in UCF.
Yeah, it's funny what happened. Buy low, sell high, right? It never fails.
That's awesome stuff right there, Jeff. With that being said, just like Nick mentioned before, let's talk about UCF, from the state of Florida perspective. Like, where does UCF rank right now among the top three Florida programs? That you have the Miami Hurricanes, you have the Florida State Seminoles, and the Florida Gators. Like, right now, where's UCF among that pecking order?
Well, it's a football crazy state, right? And I think that over the last 5 years, I would say UCF has it can make an argument for being number three. I think a very strong argument for being number three, maybe number two. I don't know. It depends on who you ask. You've seen some ups and downs on the part of the big three: Miami, Florida, and Florida State. Florida State's been in a real rough spot the last few years. Not saying they can't dig themselves out of it. They have the resources to do it, being in the ACC, but they've had a rough time of it. Miami had that spike under Mark Richt, right? And then but at the end of the season, it just always seems like Miami runs out of gas. Florida has been up and down. They've had some, coaching changes here and there over the last 5 years, but they seem to have sort of stabilized the ship under Dan Mullen. But in the meantime, you've had UCF since 2015 has never missed a bowl game, has had an undefeated season, came within 8 points of another, and a 25-game win streak at one point. And UCF clearly has made their case where over the last 5 years, I think they are one of the 3 best programs in the state. If you talk about historically, they are all alone, I think, at number 4. If you think about all time, there was sort of a battle going on between UCF and USF as to which team is in that second tier in the state of Florida, but UCF has won that clearly because for a number of reasons, both on field and off the field. But I think the primary reason is because UCF has, as an institution, has invested in football, and not to mention all the other sports. And USF kind of doesn't have an identity right now in terms of what they want their program to be. UCF was the first program in the state to have an indoor practice facility, and they got that in 2004 when George O'Leary was here. South Florida still hasn't built one yet. In fact, a couple of the other schools, of Florida had just recently built one.
Very recently.
Yeah, Miami too. I mean, and that was a huge thing at UCF that they wanted to do. They just built a new building to go with the football weight room that they had at the same time. There's just been a lot of investment at UCF, and that has put them in a very strong position over the past 20 years to make a claim to knock on the door of the big 3 and say, "Hey, we're here. We're right with you guys." They may not be the oldest kid on the block, but in terms of the more recent results, they're there.
Yeah, most definitely. You kind of see, FAU, FIU, and USF kind of hanging around, in the thick of things. But Lane Kiffin, that was a sexy hire, more recently. So it really seems like the state of Florida with all the programs, it really seems like they're kind of jumbled together. Especially if you look at FAU, FIU, and USF, but you really see, the transition of UCF just taking up. So over the last 5 years, we saw a lot of coaching changes. We're going to talk about the Gus bus later on in this episode. So, UCF, for those who don't know, from a population standpoint, from a student body, like UCF, the population is tremendous. So just like you said, Jeff, just from the state of Florida perspective, it's a football crazy state. And I think UCF is definitely trending in the right direction.
Yeah. And a lot of that has to do with, UCF is kind of a phenomenon based on how college football has evolved over the past 50 years. The program started in 1979. And they were Division III independent at the time. And UCF did it the hard way. They moved up from D3 to D2 to D1 AA, now FCS. They made a couple of playoff runs there. Then they moved up to D1A, which is now FBS, as an independent in 1996. And you don't see that really anymore. Nowadays, you see whenever there's a new program that comes around, like a good example of that is USF, where they started their program and it was immediately an FCS program. And then a few years later, they bumped up to FBS in the late 90s. All due credit to them. They made the investment at the time to do it, but it's different than, when you start off, the UCF's first game was at a school called St. Leo, which is about 50 miles outside of Orlando. They don't have a football team anymore. And the football field was like a cow pasture between 2 goalposts. But it's one of the interesting things when you think about, UCF developing as a program is, does anyone have like film or photographic evidence of like the University of Michigan's first ever football game? Like, I don't know.
Right.
I haven't seen it, but there's video of UCF's first football game in 1979. And we in Central Florida and in Orlando have seen UCF's program grow throughout the years from, that ragtag bunch in secondhand and third hand uniforms to, going undefeated in FBS and beating mighty Auburn to clinch the Peach Bowl and a share of the national championship. That's a remarkable story when you really think about it.
A lot of the demographic has to do with the demographics of the school, right? Like it was
Yeah.
more of a commuter school early on, if I'm correct.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, the university is pretty young. It was founded in 1963 as part of the expansion of the space program. It was designed to be a feeder school for Cape Canaveral.
Right.
And
what was the original mascot name for those who don't know?
Well, you're looking at it right now. Well, a funny story about this: the Citronaut was never actually UCF's official mascot. It was.
Really?
Showed up right. It showed up in the school paper one year, I think, in the 70s, and it was kind of like I remember even when I was in school in the early 2000s, it was kind of like it was kind of like a novelty thing. It's like, God, look at this dorky thing that we did, and then something flipped in the 2000s, and the marketing department really kind of latched onto it as like this alter ego identity, and everyone loved it. Even me.
Citrus astronaut. It's a great combo, man.
Right. It's so unique, and it's like that retro corny kind of thing, but it's like, oh, it's great. Like there's no other Citronauts anywhere.
Not even joking, the space uniforms, that they're alternate space jerseys they wear every year. Those
what a huge hit!
Some of the coolest unis in college football.
I'm a space geek. I'm wearing my Kennedy Space Center.
There you go.
Center shirt. So like when they did that, I was like, oh my God, sign me up. Just shut up and take my money.
You gotta get one of those. You in for one of those bids on one of those helmets sometime soon, man. That's good.
You know, it's funny. I kind of feel like a little icky about that. I don't want to. I'm like, it belongs to the kid, you know.
Yeah, it could.
No, I can't do that. I understand why though. I don't know. Maybe one day I'll change my mind.
Yeah.
Or maybe I'll buy one of the mini helmets. That's what I want to get.
There you go.
There you go.
Little morally, you can take that a little better. Well, right. I think overall, you talk about the program going through 1AA. Most on a national level, I think most people never heard of UCF on the football field till a fellow by the name of Dante Culpepper came through there and put them on the map. Had some good teams, but really the credit is given on the FBS level to the George O'Leary era of really establishing the program. And I mean, they went through some weird, funky times where I think at one point they were in the MAC, and then they, I think after that they went over to Conference USA, and the program kind of had its ebbs and flows. It starts with a winless season. O'Leary ends with a winless season, but in between he built a lot of 8-9 win seasons, and you had the Fiesta Bowl victory with Blake Bortles over Baylor. So, yeah. I mean, certainly some good moments over George O'Leary. Now, the question I have, I went to a game a couple years ago for my first game in the Bounce House. Was it statue worthy? Because there is a statue of the band sitting outside of the Bounce House, which I found fascinating.
You know, I went to school during the end of the Mike Kruzek era and the beginning of the George O'Leary era. George's first season was my senior year in 2004 and 2005. And then I came back and I worked for the athletic department a couple years after that. You could see the beginnings of something under Mike Kruzek, who took over for Gene McDowell, who's a longtime head football coach, was a disciple of Bobby Bowden, later became the athletic director and head football coach. You could see something brewing there. But in the late 90s, UCF still felt sometimes like an FCS program playing in FBS. They were an independent. They played sometimes 2 or 3 FCS programs a year. And they were basically a homecoming opponent for SEC and ACC schools. Mm-hmm. But every year UCF would have a couple of close calls with like Georgia Tech, Clemson. We actually coined the term UCFing the game, because like we would always find a way to screw it up in the last minute, and it would be some dumb holding penalty, or there was a famous game actually between the Hedges and Georgia where UCF was driving to win the game, and a flag was thrown on a pass to the end zone. And all the UCF fans were like, oh my gosh, pass interference on Georgia. They're going to put the ball at the 1 yard line. We're going to win the game. And the call went against UCF, knocked us out of field goal range. And I found it. I found the video of it, and it is an atrocity, to put it bluntly. Well, think about that happening like 2 or 3 times a year, every year, right? And there was the detour into the MAC. UCF at the time, the UCF has had its eye on joining one of the big conferences for a very long time. But the idea of the athletic department at the time was to wait and for that bid. Well, they didn't. It never came.
Right.
And in the meantime, South Florida joined Conference USA first, right? And then that kind of opened the door for them to eventually join the Big East. In the meantime, UCF had to join the MAC for 2 years, and an entertaining couple years it was. UCF came pretty close to making the MAC championship game their first year, but their second year, which was George O'Leary, or they're in their third year in the MAC, I should say, when George O'Leary took over the program after Mike Kruzek, they went 0-11. But the whole thing about the O'Leary getting a statue, and I kind of I'm a little uncomfortable with it myself, because there were a lot of controversies that happened over George O'Leary's tenure at UCF. There was the Eric Plancher incident, which will always be there. And it was just when you think about George O'Leary, I can't not think about that.
What was the Plancher incident for people who don't know?
There was a wide receiver at UCF named Eric Plancher, and in an off-season workout, he collapsed and died. He suffered from sickle cell trait.
Remember this story.
And there were reports coming out, and there was a lawsuit. UCF actually lost the lawsuit. At the time, it wasn't really handled very well, and there was the belief that George O'Leary was responsible for it based on the fact that he's the head football coach, and also there were reportedly some pretty barbaric practice conditions at the time for an off-season practice. It's been well covered in the Orlando Sentinel, much more thoroughly than I could ever recount here. But, when a player dies on your watch, that's to me, that's like, ugh, man, it was really heartbreaking.
I mean, we saw that at Maryland.
Yeah.
What happened with that a couple of years ago, DJ Durkin. We saw the same. We saw how that's handled. Yeah.
Yeah, and it really wasn't handled well by UCF or George O'Leary at the time, and I don't think in analyzing George O'Leary's legacy at UCF that should be dismissed. It really shouldn't. And there were people who were he was very much like Bill Parcells in a way. Like there were O'Leary guys, and there were not O'Leary guys.
So my understanding is by the end of his era, part of the reason why the team just totally collapsed after that Fiesta Bowl season. I mean, they had one more season in between where I think they won 8 or 9 games, but
won a share of the conference title. That's in 2014.
Right.
Too. People forget that.
So a couple great seasons there, and then they fell apart. But it sounded like just the team chemistry was just all out of whack at that point.
Yeah,
and Scott Frost comes in, and really that was one of his big things that he did early on was repair that culture.
Yeah, and George O'Leary was great for his time at UCF, where in the mid to late 2000s, UCF joined Conference USA, was playing against teams that were more along its caliber. They built the on-campus stadium in 2007. First of all, that's the big moment when the program really started to take off. They win Conference USA in
much 2000. Better venue than the Citrus Bowl.
Right? Yeah, because we used to play off campus at the Citrus Bowl,
which is not a good stadium for those who have been.
But it's awesome now.
They redid it, but I went back in the day. No, I've been to some old Citrus Bowl games where with those bleachers, it was not a great.
Yeah, it was rough. It was a dump, but it was our dump, right? It was one of those things. But But when the new stadium was built on campus, that completely changed the culture around the football program, and O'Leary was instrumental behind that. He was also instrumental in building UCF into a program, right? And showing and building up the institutional memory so that UCF knew what it took to be a major college football program and a system. And it culminated in 2013 in UCF's first year in the American Athletic Conference, which was if you remember, the remnants of the old Big East, right? For that 1 year, the American inherited the Big East's automatic slot in the BCS bowl games, and UCF won the conference their first year. They beat Louisville in a thrilling game in Louisville when Louisville was supposed to be, they had Charlie Strong, they had Teddy Bridgewater. They were supposed to be the class of the American Athletic Conference in its first year, and what turned out to be Louisville's last year in the conference. And UCF goes up to Louisville and beats them 38-35. And Blake Bortles has a phenomenal drive down the field in the final minute to get them there. And UCF wins that Fiesta Bowl going away against Baylor in a game that they were, I think, at least 17-point underdogs, and threw 52 on Baylor in the Fiesta Bowl in their first ever game on that stage. And that was like, okay, UCF has made the national stage. 12-1 season, conference championship, knocking off Baylor, and doing what they did. And it was the culmination of that O'Leary era of building the program. But at the same time, the culture of college football changed in that period. And George O'Leary, I always refer to him as the last 20th century football coach, because the game very quickly passed him by. You could see some indications of that in 2014. And when Charlie Taff, who is the late Charlie Taff, who is the offensive coordinator under O'Leary, retired and moved on, you could see that there was some erosion on the offense, and then the whole thing just collapsed in 2015. And when Scott Frost came in, and the first thing that happened was O'Leary at the time was not only the head football coach, but he was also the interim athletic director.
Right.
The athletic director, Todd Stansberry, had left.
I didn't want to skip over Danny White too.
Right.
Danny White's a big part of the equation too.
Yeah, exactly. So think about that fall of 2015. UCF goes 0-12, and they were not in any game that they played at all. It looked very clearly like the team had quit on George O'Leary and his staff. Danny White comes in, young guy. He's my age. He's in his mid 30s. Comes over from Buffalo. Pedigree, of course, his dad is the AD, longtime AD at Duke, retiring this year, actually. He's got his whole family's in athletic administration.
Kevin White, Mike White, his brother's the coach at Florida
Kevin
basketball.
And Mike.
Brothers
he's got
at
a sister.
FAU.
He's got a sister who's also in administration.
Yep.
But so White comes in and cleans house, and it starts with the football program. Hires Scott Frost, at that time the offensive coordinator out of Oregon. Gives Frost basically the directive of fix this, do what you have to do. Frost immediately shows the thing that he said about the players that he came to in 2015 and 2016, where he said that he needed them to enjoy football again because they weren't at the time. And that was a symptom of the prior coaching staff. It just was. And you could see really quickly that it was a very talented roster that had lost its love for the game, and Frost instilled that back into them immediately. Total change on the offense. They go from a very, 20th century pro style offense to the high flying Oregon read option, downfield throwing kind of thing that we're used to seeing. The defense becomes much more aggressive in terms of making big plays, causing turnovers, things like that. And in 3 years, UCF goes from 0-12 and a disaster under O'Leary to 6-7 and lost a bowl game to Arkansas State in Orlando, to 2017, the magical year, 13-0, conference championship, New Year's Six bowl victory over Auburn. And it started with the hiring of Danny White, who, and by the way, Frost wasn't the only person that he hired. He changed the face of UCF athletics throughout a bunch of different sports, kept the best coaches around that he could find, and those whose programs weren't performing, he quickly moved on. For example, a great example of that, UCF's tennis program. All right. Florida, tennis, synonymous with each other, right? UCF was playing on moldy old rec courts when Danny White got here. What happens the next year? He hires John Roddick, Andy's brother, to be the director of tennis, which puts him in charge of both men's and women's programs. And he's also the head coach in men's tennis. They moved to the brand new USTA National Tennis Center in southwestern or southeastern Orlando, and they play their home matches there in the best facility in the country. Total turnaround for that sport. And that's just one example of some of the things that Danny White was able to do in his time at UCF.
One of the major impacts that we all know about as football fans, makes a claim to the 2017 national championship.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you, it's something that there's always a little chuckle that follows that. But you folks at UCF don't joke about that.
We do not joke about that.
It's on the building. There was a poll that declared UCF the national champions, and it's really done. The attention has been a positive. It's been a real plus for UCF, and it's something where, I mean, hey, that's one of my favorite parts about college football. I love the claim, because my favorite thing is when it's an Alabama fan, you can be like, yeah, UCF won it, and then when it's a UCF fan, you'd be like, Alabama won that, and you don't have to acknowledge either one of them. That's the best part about it for me. But hey, in all seriousness, that's a real deal claim for UCF, and it's really changed the trajectory of the football program.
It was a brilliant move, because think about it. And we wrote about it on Black and Gold Banneret. When it happened, I wrote a piece, we're part of Vox Media, and Vox.com likes to do explainers. So I did an explainer, and I called it UCF's National Championship Explained.
Oh, we will put, I got your article. We'll put this in the show notes, by the way.
Yeah,
this is great.
And I wrote it down, and it's like, look, it's in the book, the NCAA. If you go to the NCAA's record book that they publish every year, their college football record book, you see 2017, Alabama and UCF. Yeah, because of the Colley matrix. UCF's patron saint of football, of course, is Dr. Wesley Colley, the guy who created the Colley matrix. But think about it. What happened that year? So UCF goes undefeated, is the only undefeated team in the country in FBS, by the way. Defeats Auburn in the Peach Bowl in Georgia, an Auburn team that beat Alabama and beat Georgia that year, right?
Who played the two teams that played for the national title?
Two teams that played for the national championship, right? Tua threw the touchdown pass to Devontae Smith and all that. But UCF is sitting out there at the end of the game like, all right, we're undefeated. Why didn't we get a shot at this? We beat Auburn. If we're good enough to beat Auburn, we're probably good enough to give you guys a game. What's the deal? And it was a brilliant move by Danny White on the field during the post game. He turns to one of the cameras, and it was a mobile camera run by Eric DeSalvo, who runs social media at UCF. And Danny White just looks into the camera. It basically goes up to him. It's like, "What do you think, boss?" And Danny White just looks in the camera and says, "National champs, undefeated." And it went viral. Because there was an entire week, because the college football playoff national championship was played on the same field 1 week later. There was an entire week of, hey, look at UCF claiming a national championship. What are they even talking about? Like, Danny White just said it, right? And
parade at Disney World,
right? The parade at Disney World. I was there. It was awesome. But the amazing thing about it was, UCF dominated the college football conversation, not just for that week, but for the whole offseason.
Yeah.
Because of that. And it was just, it was a,
Does game
it was
day
a marketing
next year. Does game day come the next year if that doesn't happen?
No, they do not come the next year if that happens. It's, and that to me was the seminal moment in UCF's institutional history having to do with athletics is when College Game Day came there in 2018, and you saw this gorgeous school. It was freezing everywhere else in the country, and there was this beautiful school in Orlando with all the students, running around on the Memory Mall, and UCF wins that game against Cincinnati. And go back and look at that game against Cincinnati in 2018. By then, of course, Scott Frost had left, but how do you not, if you're some kid in, Logan, Utah or something, or Wheeling, West Virginia, watch that game on ABC on a Saturday night, UCF and Cincinnati, and you see this absolute madhouse on television. You're like, I want to go to that place. That place looks like a lot of fun to be.
Jeff, that's the only UCF game I've been to. I went that night.
What a game.
I was blown away. I've been to national championship games. I've been to big time bowl games. I've been to about every type of game you can go to. That environment was A+. Bounce House blew me away too, because aesthetically, it's not a very aesthetically pleasing stadium. It's just a bunch of bleachers and a basically pretty basic bowl type stadium, but you really do shake. That thing was really rocking in there, and I was very impressed by it. But I just wanted to make that clear, because it's something that as college football fans, a lot of people will crack on UCF about that, but that ain't no joke in Orlando, Florida. It's not that's a real claim, and it's done a lot on the business side for the school. But I'll let Rob jump in here, take you through the Josh Heupel years.
Sure.
Yeah, Jeff. So we're leaving the Scott Frost era, and then we're jumping into the Josh Heupel era. Were you surprised when Josh Heupel was hired from Mizzou?
We all were. And it's not that we thought it was a bad hire at the time. We didn't. We knew about. There was some idea that he would be a head coaching candidate somewhere because of what he had done with Drew Lock at Mizzou. But UCF did a very good job of keeping the lid on who their new head coach was until the second he walked into the team room and introduced himself as the new head coach. And then we were so excited for that, because we knew that we were like, okay, this guy's very similar to Scott Frost, championship pedigree college quarterback, been a great offensive assistant, put up lots of good numbers with a high powered offense in a Power 5 conference. And so that was going to keep UCF's identity that they had established under Frost still going. And then we were even more encouraged by the fact that, in the same event, they announced Randy Shannon would be the defensive coordinator. We're like, oh my gosh, this is going to be great. We're going to have a defense coach by Randy Shannon, who is, for all the crap that Randy took as a head coach at both Miami and Florida, Randy's an excellent defensive coach, and you can't convince me otherwise. And to have this, the high powered offense matched up with a high powered defense, it's like, okay, we're going to be fine. This is going to be good. And to Josh Heupel's credit, he had a very tough job, because Scott Frost in 2 years changed the entire culture of UCF football, and his players, and I don't think this is discussed enough, his players absolutely loved him. And in parachutes Josh Heupel, who is almost like the substitute teacher, and he has to gain the trust of this group of players who the previous year went undefeated and won a national championship. And like, okay, what are you going to show us? That's a hard job for any coach to do. What does he do? Wins his first 12 games. And wins another conference championship, and wins some close games. There was that game in Memphis in the regular season, 31-30 in the rain, where it did not look good, and then Heupel makes this what it was. I think it was the key moment of his tenure as a coach. 4th and 1 on their own 29, and they're down 30-16, I think, late in the third, and time is running out. And they go for it on 4th and 1, and Taj McGowan runs 71 yards for a touchdown. If they don't make it, the game's basically over. Mm-hmm. Instead, they score the touchdown and they get within one possession. And then Mackenzie Milton's famous dive into the end zone, the defensive stop at the end of the game, and the streak keeps going. It was theatrical in every way you could possibly imagine. And I think Josh Heupel, earned his stripes with his players that day. And, they didn't go undefeated to finish the season. They lost to LSU, but, there's a lot of legends around that game. Like, UCF did jump out to a lead. People forget that. And then magically Joe Burrow turned into the Joe Burrow that we now know, in that, after the first quarter of that game, like there's,
UCF got out pretty good.
Yeah, on a pick six.
Got lit up. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a pick. Yeah, he threw a pick six in that game. And Brandon Moore's run it back for a touchdown to give UCF, I think, a 14-0 lead. Joe Burrow gets absolutely blasted by Joey Connors, a defensive lineman. And there was a penalty on the play for excessive celebration or something. But I would love to know if somebody looked at Joe Burrow's career numbers prior to that hit, including the game, and then after that hit, because Joe Burrow owes Joey Connors a significant sum of money, because after that hit, man, Joe Burrow, he couldn't miss.
Hey, Rob, there goes UCF taking credit for more things.
I'm telling you, listen, go back and look at that game, see what happened, because LSU played a great game. Their defense was excellent against UCF's backup quarterback, by the way, Darryl Mack Jr., who came in after Mackenzie Milton's devastating leg injury.
Not nearly the passer as Milton, so you guys were really missing that element of the game. To play LSU as well as you did was really impressive.
I'm convinced that if Mackenzie Milton plays in that game, UCF wins by 2 touchdowns. I'm absolutely convinced of it. That's how good Mackenzie Milton was, and he's up there with Dante Culpepper and Kevin Smith on the UCF football Mount Rushmore. There's no doubt about it. But even so, UCF lost that game. Lost that game by 8, and they had the ball in the final minute, with a chance to tie. So, with the backup quarterback, with everything that had gone against them at that point, and first loss. That was their first loss after 25 consecutive wins. Which was it still to this day it's still mind blowing, and you always wonder. There's a party that wonders, like, oh my God, is it ever going to end? And like, it's going to end. You don't want it to. Mm-hmm. It's like, how does it end? And it's like, all right, well, we'll deal with, we'll accept that. It's still an amazing year by an amazing team that overcame a lot.
So we know injuries are a part of the game, Jeff, but that Mackenzie Milton, when he went down with a severe injury, what was the temperature of the room, just with the rehab and just knowing the severity of the injury? What was the fan base reactions after that, inside and outside of the university?
It was total shock. And the shock only deepened when everyone realized, like, the severity of his injury. Like, it happened against USF in Tampa on a quarterback run to the right. It's like, which we've all seen a gazillion times. And then all of a sudden he gets hit low, and it's bad immediately. And I was reminded of, like, Napoleon McCallum or Joe Theismann. I think everyone seems to come to mind.
Willis McGahee.
Willis McGahee. You just know it's devastating. And and we didn't realize it until a couple months later that he came awfully close to losing his leg, having to have it amputated at Tampa General that night. Because there was concern that there was no blood flow to his lower leg. And what a job by the doctors to bring it. But it still was, he was in the hospital for a long time. Obviously, his rehab has been well covered. And we'll talk about, the latter part of his career, I'm sure, a little bit later. But he was, up until even through the injury, he was the heart and soul of that team. He came in as a true freshman in 2016 under Scott Frost, had some growing pains, was booed off the field at the Cure Bowl in 2016. Booed off the field. All right. The next year he comes in, undefeated season, one of the nation's top passers. has a PhD, as far as I'm concerned, in running the option. Best option quarterback I've ever seen. And was it, and just seemed to be playing on a different level than the other 21 guys around him on the football field. He was playing chess while everybody else was playing checkers. Was an unbelievably accurate passer. He doesn't get enough credit for how accurate he was. And so smart, just such a smart player. And to see that happen to him was, to the guy who is the heart and soul of your entire team, that had been through so much and had rebounded after the 2015 season, was absolutely heartbreaking for everybody. And that's why that AAC championship game against Memphis the following week was the most emotional UCF football game I've ever been a part of. I covered it for Black and Gold Banneret, and you could tell it was just a raw afternoon for everybody there. And for UCF to come back in the second half after it looked like Memphis was going to steamroll them in the first half, and Memphis just running all up. Daryl Henderson. I mean, people in LA are like, "Oh man, Daryl Henderson." I'm like, well, I'll tell you about Daryl Henderson, because that kid is really something. We were like, thank God he's gone out of this conference, man. That kid, he can't be stopped. And UCF comes back in the second half. Daryl Mack runs for 4 touchdowns, and UCF gets the job done. And it was an emotional night. I was, I still get goosebumps thinking about that team and what they were able to do to get there, with all the things that were going against them, the loss of the quarterback, and also fighting uphill in the polls all year long. They were undefeated, and everyone's like, well, you lost your head coach, so you're not as good. Well, wait a minute, we're still winning every game. You going to give us a shot this year? No. So, but that was a key moment, and we were holding out hope, into this past season that we would see Mackenzie Milton take the field again in a UCF uniform, and it didn't happen. And of course, he announced his transfer to Florida State, where he's going to try and compete for the starting job. I think he'll get it, and I think he should deserve to get it. And so it was a bittersweet ending to a career that spanned a period of time at UCF that was filled with triumph and tragedy. And that was something that, but he'll never be forgotten as long as anyone, he will forever be synonymous with UCF football. I don't care if he throws for 68 touchdowns this year for Florida State. He'll always be a UCF Knight. That's always how he's going to be remembered.
Yeah, so let's talk about a little bit. Obviously, I really think that's a marker in the program when Milton goes down, and certainly Heupel comes in after all the momentum with Frost and everything, but there was a certain. I mean, it's hard to go 12-0 every year. So like when he got hired, and I watched this whole. Everyone, you can have whatever opinion you want about Clay Travis, but the guy's calling him a loser when he's getting hired at Tennessee. I'm like, the guy won a lot of football games in Orlando. He's not exactly Mr. Personality when he gets up there and talks to the media or anything like that. But give me some of the pluses and minuses of Josh Heupel era at UCF, because I think we heard a lot more negatives on his way out the door than we ever heard while he was actually there. That was a little strange to me.
Yeah, I don't think that all that was very fair.
Yeah,
in a way, because everyone is going to look at his 3 years at UCF and say, well, he regressed every year. He went from 12-1, from 13-0, the year before, to 12-1, to 10-3, to 6-4, and that doesn't tell the whole story. The 10-3 year, they lost 3 games by one score or less with a true freshman quarterback, in Dylan Gabriel, who, and that was really the first year that UCF had fully grasped Heupel's system, which is, people forget, very different from Scott Frost's system.
Yeah,
the air raid is night and day. Sure, they all go fast and they all score a lot of points, but the air raid that Heupel runs, Mike Leach, and all that, is night and day compared to Scott Frost's, option-based, beat you around the edges, Oregon type system. right? So, I do think Josh Heupel is a good football coach. I think looking back on it, I would have preferred if he had like coached for 2 years at like Middle Tennessee as a head coach prior to coming to UCF, because he was taking over a program that was, and granted, Scott Frost was also a head coach for the first time at UCF, but that's still hard to do. And I think that Heupel wasn't quite as ready to be a head coach as Scott Frost was when he got here. I think that's part of the reason why Randy Shannon was brought in addition.
Heupel didn't bring him in. He was brought in.
No, that was a package deal. It was a package deal. And when Heupel, because they were hired the same day by Danny White, as a way to transition the program to this new system. And they succeeded with the sort of hybrid offense in 2018, and then they go full air raid in 2019. And I really do believe Josh Heupel is a brilliant football mind. He's an excellent offensive coordinator. I think that this year would have been, had he stayed at UCF, this would have been a real make or break year for him. I think he gets a pass in 2020 because of all the opt-outs from COVID. COVID had, because of UCF had, I think, 10 or 11.
Yeah.
10 or 11 guys opted out before the season, including some key defensive starters. Okay. It hit the defensive side of the ball much harder than the offensive side of the ball. Then there was an off-field incident that got 4 players kicked off the team that were defensive veterans also. So by the end of the year, UCF was throwing guys out there that had never played a collegiate snap, and all of a sudden they're playing against they're playing against Wilson and BYU and getting smoked in Boca. Well, like, it was child's play out there for him. He was playing a bunch of guys who hadn't really played regularly since.
Well, and outside of that
freshman and stuff,
outside of that BYU game, it was pretty good season.
Yeah, I mean, pretty doggone good year. Yeah, it was the loss to Cincinnati. That one hurt at home. They had some chances to win that game. I think a lot of fans were upset because UCF blew leads in those games. They had a lead against Tulsa that they blew. They had a lead against Cincinnati that they blew. They scored 50 points at Memphis and racked up 800 total yards. 800 total yards offense. Dylan Gabriel threw for 600 yards, and UCF lost the game. Not a field goal at the end.
I'm glad you brought up Dylan Gabriel, because I'm looking at the hire up at Tennessee. So Danny White, who I'm looking at the Danny White situation thinking this guy could have almost any job in America that he wants. And for some reason he picked Tennessee. I'm not sure why he picked Tennessee. I understand the history of Tennessee, but what a mess he's walking into, that he's got a big job to clean up. But he not only comes up there, but he brings Heupel with him after a search. But Tennessee fans who are upset about it, I'm sitting there going, y'all don't deserve these two. These two, these two are better than where you're sitting right now. And as much as you could crack on Heupel and pick at Heupel and nitpick here and there, when's the last time Tennessee had a quarterback that was anything remotely close to what Dylan Gabriel has been at UCF?
When was the last time Tennessee had an offense?
Quarterback, period. Yeah, that's what he does. So he's going to at least bring. That's what I told Rob. I was like, he can elevate them to 7-6 and make them an entertaining football team, and that's a positive. That's a big growth. But I don't know. I think if you're so talk to those Tennessee fans who are frustrated about what they're really getting in with Danny White and what they're getting with Josh Heupel here.
Well, with Danny White, I'll speak to Danny White first. You're getting a guy who came to Tennessee because he believes he can rebuild anything from the ground up. And Tennessee's athletic department needs to be torn down and rebuilt. And that's exactly what he plans to do. And it's going to take more time than it took at UCF, but he knows how to hire coaches. He knows how to fundraise. He knows how to make noise, to make you guys matter again. And that's what Tennessee's donors in particular want to see. As far as Josh Heupel is concerned, he is the final victory of the spread offense, because the spread offense has infected the SEC. We saw it in LSU, right? With Burrow. Yeah. We've seen it at Bama. Bama runs the spread, right?
Yeah.
And Josh Heupel's and the air raid is the spread on steroids. And Josh Heupel is if not the king, that's Mike Leach. but he's also in the SEC.
Yeah.
So he's definitely the crown prince, and they are trying violently to push Tennessee into the 21st century. And whether or not they're going to do it, for Tennessee fans' sake, I hope so, but they got to give him a chance to do it. They got to give him a chance to do it. And, everyone talks about, Tennessee being a real pressure cooker, and I get it. It's an SEC program. They're seeing everybody around them really succeed. It's been a long time since Peyton Manning was there and T. Martin and when Phil Fulmer was in his prime as a head coach. But, you've got to trust in Danny. We trusted in Danny, and look where it got us. You guys got to trust in Danny. He knows
they don't have your patience.
They're going to have to.
Because
if not, if they don't let Danny White fix that problem, and it is a fixable problem, because here's the difference between Tennessee and UCF is this: Tennessee has a lot of money. UCF does not. I mean, if you gave UCF Tennessee's that they get from ESPN and CBS every year, that giant SEC television check, UCF would rule the college football world. I'm absolutely convinced of it. Now you're giving Danny White that kind of money. What can he do with it? We're going to find out, because I think it's going to be a fun time at Tennessee, but they have to let Danny be Danny and let him fix the problem. Because if Tennessee proves, tries to prove once again that they are too big to fail, they're going to fail again and again. Because at some point you got to look around and be like, man, if Danny White couldn't get this thing, if they didn't give Danny White a chance, what athletic director would look at it and be like, why would I want to go there? Why would I want to deal with these people?
Why would Danny White want to go there, though? Even after your explanation, I still don't have a good answer for that.
He's young. I think sometimes it's, he's young. So I think
he's got to play Alabama every year. He's got to play Florida every year. He's got to play Georgia every year. And I don't know if you're up on your recent Tennessee football history, but that ain't going so well.
The thing is with Danny is he's a rebuilder. He did it at Buffalo. I mean, look where Buffalo.
Lance Leopold was a hell of a hire
right
there. Yeah.
He rescued UCF from the scrap heap. That could have gotten really bad after 2015. I don't think people around here realize what dire straits the program was in at the time, and he fixed it. And now his biggest challenge is fixing Tennessee. And if you're the kind of guy who likes a challenge, as Danny White does, what bigger challenge is there than that?
Hey, I definitely agree with that one, Jeff. Just like we saw Scott Frost leave the program and go to Nebraska, which was his dream job. Ultimately, he played there. So just coming in, like what was the temperature and the climate when Scott Frost left out? What was the fan base reaction? Was it I know Josh Heupel came in right after that, but Scott Frost, great coach, bringing that system over from Oregon. After he left, like what was everyone saying around the campus, inside and out?
Trusted Danny.
Well, yeah, that's right. In Danny, we trust. And also there was a lot of consternation towards Frost because there had been some rumblings about how he left. And I don't begrudge him for him leaving or how he left. I don't think there's any good way to really handle that.
Do you think Scott Frost begrudges himself for leaving now?
That's a better question. But there were thoughts that, okay, so UCF played at Temple in Philadelphia late in 2017, and reportedly Frost had met with one of his best friends from his Nebraska days, Matt Davison, and then the athletic director at Nebraska at the time, I forget his name.
Bill Moose.
Bill Moose, thank you. And had basically ironed out a deal, at that time, that he, when Mike Riley was let go, that Frost would come back home. But to Scott's credit, even after he announced that he was taking the Nebraska job, and that was after the American Athletic Conference Championship game, actually the afternoon, that evening, an hour after the game, he calls the players in for a meeting and tells them that I'm leaving for Nebraska. And actually there's a great feature on UCF. If you go to YouTube and you go to UCF site and you look for Nightflix 2017, and they actually have audio of his meeting with the players, and it's really emotional. I mean, it's like, this is some Oscar-worthy stuff. No joke. But to his credit, he said he announced that he would come back to UCF to coach the bowl game. And that entire month, he flew back and forth between Lincoln and Orlando, setting his staff up, setting his office up, setting the recruiting up in Nebraska, and coming back and coaching the team in Orlando. And a couple of the players told me this story. This is a great story. The first practice that they had, the first full practice that they had after the American Championship in preparation for the Peach Bowl against Auburn, the guys were not into it. They were kind of, I hate to use the word lollygagging, but like they were loud. They weren't totally into it. And Frost cuts the practice short. He said, "Everybody stop, come here." And he told them all, he said, "Listen to me. I am not flying my happy rear end." He didn't use rear end, by the way. Back and forth between Lincoln and Orlando, just so that we can get our butts beat on New Year's Day. I'm making this full commitment to you. I came back here and I promised you I would come back to coach this game so that we can finish the job, finish our undefeated season, because I know we can beat Auburn. But I'm not going to do it unless you guys are totally on board. So are you in or you out right now? And that flipped the switch on the players. It also helped having a month of rest after playing 11 consecutive games without a bye week because of the hurricane earlier in the season that canceled the game. But they had time to recover. They refocused, and boy, they were ready to play against Auburn. They were ready for that game, and it proved itself out. And I think UCF, there are some UCF fans who are still bitter about Scott Frost leaving, and kind of have a little Schadenfreude at him right now about how things are going at Nebraska. But if you're honest with yourself and you put yourself in his shoes, 100% of people do the same exact thing.
It wasn't just him. It was like he's got family ties, generational ties to Nebraska.
He's a Nebraska kid.
Yeah.
His mom and his dad were his high school football coaches.
Yeah.
That's a football family right there, right? In the 90s when it was, when it wasn't,
Do you know the story about him going to Stanford? He went to Stanford originally, and basically the state of Nebraska was like in an uproar. He ends up transferring back.
He transferred back because he was
like the guy who left. Like they gave him a hard time for a while, and he had to. He won that national title in '97. That's when he kind of became the beloved guy.
And he came in because obviously everybody at Nebraska, they won 2 national championships with the great Tommy Frazier.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's
they
a good
were,
act to follow.
Yeah. I mean, that's hard to do, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then who was was it Brooke Beringer, who was supposed to be the next guy? Remember him?
Yeah.
Died in a plane crash the summer before. And all of a sudden back comes Scott Frost, who, like you said, went to Bill Walsh was the head coach at Stanford at the time. And said, liked him so much. He was like, come over here. And he actually did play at Stanford, but then transferred back to Nebraska because he was homesick, and all of a sudden finds himself to start. It was a rocky time. You remember they lost to Texas in the first Big 12
96.
championship game, and people blamed him for that unfairly, right? You go back and look at that game. That was John Makovic's greatest game that he ever coached.
Key piece to the Florida Gators winning the '96 national title.
No question.
Yeah.
But the next year, Frost wins the national championship. Tom Osborne rides off into the sunset, and Scott Frost becomes a free safety in the NFL. Scott is a good dude, and he's always had a good heart. And it still saddens me to see some UCF fans, still sneer at him because at the end, he did a lot for UCF and was given an offer he couldn't refuse. Nobody in their right mind would refuse what Nebraska was offering.
I still think he's going to turn it around there. I think that was a total mess when he got there. It's going to take. He hasn't gotten that quarterback yet. He hasn't gotten
right.
There's a lot to do with that program, and he's still working on it.
Yeah, he's still building it back up. Yeah. It's kind of the same. I compared it to Harbaugh at Michigan. I'm like, he's going to get a couple extra lives, and he should get a couple extra lives because we know he can coach. We know he can coach. It's just a question of, again, just like with Tennessee, can the boosters and all the money guys just leave him the heck alone for a little bit?
I still have no confidence Tennessee will do that.
and give him the time to do it. It takes time. It takes time. These programs that are too big to fail, they gotta just step back and let the coaches coach.
Jeff, your knowledge of this program's unbelievable. I'm having a blast. But let's get up to modern day here, because you guys have had an exciting couple weeks here.
Feels like Frost being here was like 20 years ago, by the way.
Yeah, oh, wow. I mean, you guys, UCF keeps it interesting. That you guys definitely keep it interesting, that's for sure. But you guys go out, you hire Arkansas State's AD Terry Mohajir, which I had to learn that pronunciation. Had to do
Timo.
Yeah, I mean, his press conference was electric. The guy just seems like he does push-ups in between meetings or something like that. He seems like he's got a lot of energy, but obviously tough act to follow. Danny White builds up a little bit of a legend on campus here, but I think you got a guy that could come in a little different energy than White. White seems a little more structured and business-like, where Mohajir seems more like he's gonna put his arm around you and call you bro by the end of the night. I don't know, but what do you think of the differences? What do you think of the Timo era, as you call him, coming up?
It's when we were following the search for the new athletic director, there were a couple names that were thrown out there. We're like, oh man, I don't know, this is gonna be rough. And that weekend, we heard there was a secret candidate that got brought in at the last second, who knocked it out of the park in his interview. And we're like, man, who is this guy? And all of a sudden, it starts leaking out that it's Terry Mohajir from Arkansas State. And we're like, okay, Arkansas State. Wait a minute, this guy is an alumnus of Arkansas State, and has been there for 8 years, and he wants to come here. It's like, wow, okay, so clearly they think UCF, he must think UCF is the kind of place where he wants to take the next step. And the more we read about him, the more we learned about him, the more we talked to people about him. And then we saw the press conference. Now, I'm not a big fan of guys winning press conferences.
Right.
But if anybody could win a press conference, Terry Mohajir definitely won his press conference. My impression of him was he's Danny White plus 15 years of experience. And, Danny had made, for all the great moves that Danny had made, he took a couple risks that blew up in his face a couple times. But Terry has the experience that, he knows what works and what doesn't. And all you got to do is look at his track record at A-State, because first of all, it's Arkansas State. God bless him. It's Arkansas State. Right.
What are you saying? Jonesboro and Orlando are a little bit different.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Just a little bit. Just a little bit.
Let me ask you something though. Danny, though, I mean, you talk about the money situation between Tennessee, the gap between Tennessee and UCF, but Danny, did they almost? I feel like he had a huge impact on the financial side, where I think that's the legacy really that Mohajir's got to really kind of keep that growing, right? That's really one of his big challenges.
And that's one of his big strengths too, because the president, Dr. Alexander Cartwright at UCF, who took over for, there was one president, Dale Whitaker, who was here very shortly and had to resign. But basically Cartwright inherited the university from Dr. John Hitt, who'd been here since 1992, and had seen UCF through from, Division I AA all the way to where it is now. And it hired all the athletic directors and everything leading up to that. Well, this is President Cartwright's first AD hire. And we knew he had to really knock it out of the park here. And he did, with a guy like Terry, who, like we said, had done so much at Arkansas State, but the big thing that was one of Dr. Cartwright's priorities was the guy who was a wizard at fundraising. Danny White was a wizard at fundraising, got a lot of corporate sponsorship into UCF's program that hadn't really been there before. Disney, Orlando International Airport, a lot of.
What are those canopy seats you guys have in the end zone? What's that section called? Because they got the palm trees. You see it on TV all the time.
The cabanas.
Yeah,
the cabanas that put the cabanas up field side,
create premium seating.
Boxes, creating premium seating. They carved out a spot on the opposite side of the press box called the Black and Gold Cabana, where you can get adult beverages and like local restaurants have it's almost like if you could put food trucks up there, like you could get that. And actually, what's brilliant,
that's pretty affordable, right?
Pretty affordable. And then also, now this is one of the advantages. So UCF, the bounce house has the giant press box that's on the western side of the stadium, and the sun, when we're playing an afternoon evening game, really beats down on the east side of the stadium. So and fans are like, oh my God. I mean, it's before it was rough. Like when you're sitting on that side and the sun's really beating on you, it's a rough time because you're not in the shadow of the press box. So they had to figure out a way to sell that side of the stadium. So they carved out a piece of it and said, you can come and get, the food, the beverages, come out of the sun for a little bit, hang out. What a brilliant idea, right? And so far it's worked. Those are some of the most coveted seats in the stadium, are the ones that are in the sun because of that cabana. So that shows you kind of what Danny White was able to do. And and Terry Mohajir, was able to fundraise it. I think he expanded their budget by 3 times in his time at Arkansas State, which is just a remarkable achievement. And now you put him in the nation, in a top 20 media market in the United States. Orlando's a top 20 media market. A lot of corporate headquarters here, big tourism industry. What sort of playground is the Orlando community now to Terry Mohajir? I'm really interested to see how that phase of his game develops over the next several years.
Well, I want to see if he's going to get off of this Danny White no 2-for-1 business and actually schedule some top 10 teams here. Do you think that's going to happen?
Yeah, I think he's already basically said that without so far as saying it. That was one of the risks that Danny took that kind of blew up in his face. To be honest.
This is the non-snobby. I mean, I think you could tell we got respect for the program, right? We're not snobby like fans looking down at UCF or whatever. Like, but as a Gator fan, they don't book home and homes with anyone like that. They barely, until Scott Strickland got to Gainesville, they barely booked an away game, period.
Yeah.
Non-conference scheduling's been somewhat of a joke for a long time in Gainesville. Strickland's beefing that up big time. But and we got some home and homes and some P5s. But like, if you're UCF, like USF went out and did this. USF's got 2-for-1s with Bama, 2-for-1s with Texas, 2-for-1. Like, USF's going to be on ESPN playing these teams. And that's what UCF, though, the difference between UCF and USF right now, UCF's good enough to beat them. And why would you not put your football team on ESPN to give them that opportunity and be so stubborn about that point? I didn't understand it.
Well, that's part of it. But I think this is where the separation, I think a lot of people lump UCF and USF nationally into the same bucket, and they used to be able to do that. You can't anymore. Yeah. And here's why. USF has been administratively incompetent in advancing their football program. They really have. It's not funded the way it should be. And they're trying to turn what is a liability, and that is their home stadium, which is Raymond James, where, I mean, their home attendance is a cliche at this point. And they're trying to turn it into... I live
in Tampa. I've been to one game in 4 years, so.
Yeah, I mean, you see it, I mean, it's kind of it's a shame because they play in front of mostly empty stadiums, a mostly empty stadium every time when they play a conference game. So what do you have to do? You have to fill that place in order to get your money back because they're paying rent on that place. So you got to get Florida in there. You got to get Bama. How do you do that? Well, you lure them with, hey, you can basically, you're turning a home game into a neutral site game by doing that. And that's where UCF, if they played at the Citrus Bowl like they did back in the day, it would be a different situation. But they play on campus, and the bounce house it seats 45,000 people. So that's where the sort of the difference between UCF and USF comes into play, because when UCF and UF were flirting with the idea of doing a series after 2017, Scott Strickland was coming out there saying, well, we want to play the Orlando game in the Citrus Bowl. And Danny White was like, no, we want to play a game in our stadium. We want you to come here. We'll go to you, but we want you to come here. And that's not what they were. And Strickland was not interested in that, which is a bummer, because it would have been cool to see UCF and UF play, in the bounce house. I think that would be a remarkable atmosphere.
I think it'll happen. Happen.
I hope it will. I think that it could provide the impetus to expand the bounce house one day. There have been some plans about it thrown around for a number of years now. It wasn't until recently, actually, 2 years ago, finally, UCF actually sold out the entire stadium for 2019.
Like season tickets and everything.
Yeah,
you're saying
completely sold out.
Here's the thing: USF plays empty Raymond James. Miami plays in Hard Rock Stadium, and that's a great environment for a big game. I've been to a big game there. It's great.
Yeah.
But I've also been to games there where it's empty and it's not
true.
It's not a good environment at all. Like
true,
I like
but the difference is like Miami's not
college.
Yeah.
The smaller on-campus stadiums, like why not wear a shoe that fits? Like it's not.
Well, the thing with Miami though that's different is that they don't have to rely on attendance to fund their athletic department.
Right. Right.
And that's where being in the ACC really helps. Being in the American, I mean, what did the ACC make per school last year? I mean, it was probably the SEC came at the end of the Big Ten. They came in with some like per school, some absurd amount of money. I mean, it was something like.
Are they getting close to like 20? Like
I think it's more than that. I'll have to look it up.
It's different contracts feed in. There's like the bowls, and then there's the TV, and there's like everything else.
Yeah,
I know the Big Ten's like way ahead of everybody on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're not that far ahead of the SEC, and they're not that far ahead of the ACC. I mean, everyone blows the mind-blowing numbers are from the Big Ten because they're the ones that release it first.
Yeah.
The other schools, I mean, it was SEC payout per school 2020. I'm going to try and pull this up. It was $45.5 million.
I thought the Big Ten was
per school.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
good for Vanderbilt.
The SEC. And that's good for Vanderbilt. Still now the SEC still trails the Big Ten, but not by much.
Yeah.
But when you think about it, $45.5 million a year just for showing up, and in the American UCF until this year with the new American television contract popping in, they're expected to average about $7 million a year from their television contract through 2030, which is twice what they were getting, but it's not $45 million.
No.
I mean, so everyone talks about, Miami's attendance at I almost called it Joe Robbie because that's how old I am, but people forget
Joe
like when
Robbie.
they play. Yeah. Well, people remember Nick. I mean, I grew up in South Florida.
Yeah.
Like,
we all saw Ace Ventura, man. Joe Robbie's
I mean, when Miami was playing, Florida State in the Orange Bowl, of course they sold out 78,000 people. When they were playing ECU in Cincinnati,
terrible.
No, nobody showed up to that.
Yeah.
So it's just a question of how they, what's the perception of that, right? Whereas UCF, they kind of have to sell out every game in order to maximize their revenue. So Danny White was in a position where he's trying to get as many home games as possible against as good of opponents as possible and sell out the allotment of tickets in order to sell out the allotment of tickets and get the parking and the concessions and all that stuff.
In fairness, we've seen situations like with USF, for example, where teams have dropped out. I think Michigan State left them.
Yep.
Here's $4 million. We're going to cancel that one. So USF has to go fill the schedule with like some terrible FC. Yeah. Like some terrible game that people don't want to watch. So that happens when some of those 2-for-1 deals where the big schools will renege on the smaller schools. But you guys have one big piece coming in. Rob, you ready to jump on the Gus bus?
Yeah, we're definitely about to hop on the Gus bus. And with that being said, Jeff, so with Gus Malzahn coming in, are we going to look back on this Malzahn hire as the true beginning of the UCF's emergence as a national power football program? Or do you think Scott Frost kind of put UCF on the map with that, national championship year?
I think the latter. I think that 2017-18 year kind of really put UCF in the national consciousness. But there's a difference between getting there and staying there. And I think Gus Malzahn coming to UCF has the power to give UCF the staying power in the national consciousness. That
would you say it's the first time you've had a superstar head coach in a top performing program at the same time?
Yeah. I guess you could say that. Because Frost came in, everything was, it was, the stock was low at the time. When Heupel came in, the stock was high, but his profile wasn't all that high. When O'Leary came in, UCF was struggling, and in the MAC, so even though he was a big name at the time when he came in, it was wow, UCF hired George O'Leary. He still had a lot of. It wasn't. The program was still below the level that he was in the coaching profession. Now you have a very good program, a very good coach come together. And one of the fun things about Gus Malzahn that we've seen in the last week and a half since he's been hired is he has assembled a coaching staff that is to be reckoned with. And one of the things that I learned from talking to folks that I know who, in the SB Nation network and elsewhere, associated with Auburn was, the fans love Gus. The players really love Gus, past and present. And it was just that the boosters were trying to get him out of there the last 2 years. Why? I don't know. But fine by us. He actually said in his press conference, like he was thinking of taking a year off, going into TV for a little while and seeing what's out there. And then the UCF job opened up and he's like, oh, maybe I'll come back right now because I'm interested in that job. And that was before Terry Mohajir got hired. Because if you remember, Gus, when he was at Arkansas State in 2012, his boss was Terry Mohajir. Now Terry didn't hire Gus. Gus was already hired by the time Terry was elevated to AD, but they did work closely together. They knew each other from before. And Gus said that, when Terry took the job, that was kind of the clincher for him. He's like, okay, I need to get this job now. We talked a little bit earlier about how, my advice to Tennessee fans was you got to let the coaches coach. That's something that UCF is very good at, not just the football and all the other programs. The athletic department lets its coaches coach. Part of that is because UCF's booster culture is not nearly as developed as it is at other places. You don't have quite that much legacy money there because UCF is a young school. Only started in 1963. Football started in 1979. Mm-hmm. That's not a lot of time. You don't have that generational money that pours into UCF every year from, oil magnates and stuff like that. So, so that's part of the deal where, you don't have those people who have that kind of money to throw around and in turn want the power to throw around with it. And so the athletic department can tell the coaches, go ahead and coach. And you're in the middle of Florida, amazing recruiting ground. It's not like this. It's not like Florida is a secret anymore. Everyone recruits Florida these days. But Gus has been successful at recruiting the state of Florida previously. At Auburn, in fact, UCF got a big transfer from Auburn as well. Actually, just today, the running back,
Mark Antony.
Yeah, Mark Anthony
Richards.
Forget his Mark Anthony Richards. Announcing that he's transferring to UCF from Auburn. That's Gus provides an air of legitimacy to UCF being a national power in the same way that George O'Leary gave UCF an air of legitimacy as a football program to begin with. Like George was that first step, kind of solidifying UCF as an FBS school that, yes, we do belong here. And Gus's challenge, and I think, he's well positioned to
Get a statue.
to achieve it, is to cement UCF as a power in college football.
So statue watch officially on.
Oh, well, I don't know. I listen, if Gus is good enough to that we erect a statue to him, I'm going to have a great few years. I'm going to have a great next several years here. I don't know how long Gus will plan on staying. But my thought on it is, kind of like with the other coaches, leaving town, is like, look, this is a sought after job. It comes open. Like, there's no shortage of resumes that fly into the email inbox, right? So, if a coach leaves, hey, pay us that buyout. We use it as a down payment on the next guy. It's not like we have to convince people to come here.
Yeah.
UCF doesn't have to recruit a coach. UCF can select a coach. That's the difference.
Now, Jeff, you talked about it a little bit about Gus Malzahn coming over, bringing a former Auburn running back and Mark Anthony over, and just Florida from a state perspective being a recruiting hotbed. Do you see Gus Malzahn forming UCF into a top 10 program on a consistent basis moving forward? And how I know we always talk about coaches, you got to give them time. How long do you see that, coming into fruition of UCF being a top 10 program consistently year in and year out?
Well, it's really hard to say, be a top 10 program all the time, because first of all, the margin of error when you're in a non-power conference is so tight. You lose one game, you're an afterthought, and as we found out, a lot of games can be decided basically by a coin flip, one play here or there. UCF has seen that happen the last 3 years, games that could have been decided. The only game that they were not in the last, since 2017 was the BYU game in the bowl game this past year. So if UCF finishes like 12th in the polls, are we going to start, are the pitchforks going to come out for Gus Malzahn? No. But the other thing that UCF, I think, is going to face in terms of an uphill battle is what happens if the college football playoff gets expanded, as we all hope it will be, but we don't know if it will because it's beyond our control, right? You can't force them to expand.
More money, it'll happen.
Well, yeah, more money. But then, let's say it does expand to 8.
Yeah.
Okay. What's the format? Are there going to be automatic bids for conference champions? Is there going to be an automatic bid for the top ranked team from the non-power conferences, as we all hope it will be? Or is it just going to be, what it is now, which is 4 at-large teams? Is it just going to be 8 at-large teams?
I think we can all agree that the top 5 from the SEC probably deserve it, and then maybe Notre Dame every year. Also, you could throw Clemson in, and we'll leave UCF out when they're undefeated.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what we're afraid of over here. Like, we were undefeated after 2 conference championships in a row. We'd won 25 games in a row, and look what happened. Didn't even get a sniff. Not even ranked in the top 6.
Hey,
at the end of both of those we didn't even see our name in the first 2 left out on the brackets, Joe.
You guys gotta have you guys got an inside man now though with Terry Mohajir, right? He's on the committee.
Well, he's on the committee, but the thing is, remember when the rules of the committee is when they discuss a team, if you're affiliated with that team, you got to leave the room.
His energy will stay in the room though.
So
his energy will stay in the room.
I don't know, but like it's hard, and that was part of the beauty of 2017 too. Was Danny White actually exposed the flaws in the system that it had been sold as the be all end all, and he's like, wait a minute, no, it's not.
Yeah,
we're still on the outside looking in, and look what happened. Will that be different with Terry? I don't know. It's all going to come down to whatever this next contract looks like. I hope that there's some actual, that they set it up kind of like the NCAA tournament in basketball, where you say, okay, the five conference champions from the power conference get in. We have a G5 representative. Whoever the top ranked conference champion is from that group of five, conferences, they get in, and then 2 at-large bids. And then we'll seed them by ranking, and we'll just go from there. I hope that's what they do. If I was in charge, that's how I would do it. Well, no, I can't say that. If I was in charge, I'm one of those lunatics who would like a 16-team playoff.
Oh, you are a lunatic.
With every conference champion, because otherwise, how do you know that you really do have the best team?
In fairness to what you're saying, I mean, I would be a proponent at some point. I think even if you expand to 8, it's ridiculous to go to multiple bowl games. I mean, you can't, like, even with the playoff structure now, I think it's a little ridiculous that you got to pay to go. If you're a fan and you want to go,
we have no problem doing that with basketball.
Yeah, I guess. I think football, it's just, yeah, I guess. But even that, to some extent, like, if you're a regular fan, it's impossible to do. Basically, like, it's a once in a lifetime deal.
Yeah, but we're not talking about regular fans.
I know. But it'd be cool. It would be cool though if you could have one round at home.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And I think that would create interesting. Like, could you imagine the 11th seed UCF Knights going up to like Oregon in December and playing in the snow? Like, for
I think it would be great.
People would eat that up. I think it'd be unbelievable. I think
you
could even achieve that with an 18 playoff though. Like, where I don't know. I'm torn on it. You could sell me. Yeah, you could sell me your vision. It'd be fun to compare visions on that. But like, that's a whole other. That's a whole other.
I would have at least the first round at the campus sites.
Yeah,
at whoever the highest seed is, and if they ever went to 16, I wouldn't be opposed to having the first 2 rounds being at campus sites.
Mm-hmm.
The argument that drives me crazy is, well, you're going to hurt the bowls, like these little bowls. I'm like, nobody pays attention to the little bowls anyway. I mean, they don't get very good TV ratings. The ratings are dropping now. They don't get good attendance as of right now, and they're not even bowl games. Basically, they're programming slots for ESPN. That's really what they are. And I say that as somebody who's covered those bowl games and had a great time at them. It's great, but it's clear that there is erosion in the attention that's being paid to them because there are so many of them, and so you have teams that it's not quite as much of a reward, and the casual fan is not paying attention to the Belk Bowl. They're paying attention to who's in the playoff and those 3 games. So, I could see, and by the way, the bowl structure right now with the 6 bowl games, that's set up where you can do quarterfinals, semifinals, and a championship game right now in neutral sites, and then have the first round at home. Although I do think, I still think that they will go to 8. I think they should go to 8. I wish they could go to 12 or 16.
College football is about baby steps. It's about baby steps.
I know. Well, I mean, yeah, that's the thing. Like, forever, everyone was like, I mean, we're all old enough to remember when they were like,
playoff
in college. That'll
never happen.
That'll never happen. Look what happened. It happened. Right.
Well, just follow the money. Follow the money.
Right.
Is getting to the playoff the next milestone for UCF?
Definitely.
That's the next UCF thing that Gus can accomplish.
Yeah, that's the next logical step is crashing the party. And Gus gives UCF the sort of baseline level of attention that you need to be ranked early in the season. We know how good of a coach he is. The formula is pretty clear for UCF. But of course, that's the problem, is that it's not the same formula as it is for, Tennessee or Ole Miss or Florida or Clemson, right? They have margins for error. UCF doesn't. You have to go undefeated. You have to beat somebody in your non-conference who's good.
You guys are opening with?
Boise State.
Boise State in 2021.
Also got Louisville
opener.
on the slate too.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you also have to hope that your conference is good, right? So you have to root for Memphis. You have to root for Cincinnati. You have to hope that they beat, you know, some power conference teams in their non-conference. And then you got to beat them. Then you got to beat one of them again in the conference championship game, which may or may not be in your home stadium. And even then, if you've run through that gauntlet with no margin for error, you still have to hope that there's not some other school in another conference like the Mountain West who did the same thing and is ranked one spot ahead of you.
Right.
So, you know, I still think it's going to be a tough road, and it just all depends on how they decide to format the playoff in the coming years. This next 5 years between 2021 and 2026 are going to be a critical 5-year period for college football in general.
I don't know. The 2024 where the contracts run out? I think
they kind of run out in staggered staggered fashions. I think like the Big Tens run out in like 2023, like 3, 4, and 5 is when they all kind of run out, and then they renegotiate. But
do you expect any level? Because I know there's rumors of expansion around that time too. Do you think if 10 years from now, is UCF football going to make its first playoff because it joined a power conference, or because the playoff expanded and the American is more widely accepted as a playoff contender? Because I got to say, the American, Cincinnati, Memphis, UCF, Houston, SMU, Navy has good teams year in, year out. They're tough out. I mean, I think Jeff Scott at USF's a fantastic hire. I think they're going to get it together. I think they'll surprise some people in the next couple of years. You might not be allowed to say that, but I think that they're going to come along, and I think that conference is just going to gain more and more respect as they go. Even if they have to kick and scream for it a little bit, they might not have to move up out of the conference, though.
It's such a good question. I think that it's more likely right now that if UCF does get into the college football playoff, if it's 4 or 8 teams or whatever, that it's as a representative of the American Athletic Conference. I think it's that's more likely.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with conference realignment and conference expansion is that it's driven by the presidents of the institutions, which means how you perform on the field has zero bearing on what your conference affiliation is.
Listen,
None.
I know you're talking about Rutgers in the Big Ten, and they want to let you know that if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be playing this whole college. It's the birthplace of college football. So you take
that's great.
Rutgers name out of your mouth.
They can hang the plaque in Piscataway and move right on. Although I'm a Jersey boy, and I do like seeing Rutgers succeed. And I do like that Greg Schiano is back there, and because apparently he's the only head coach who can have success at Rutgers. But as far as the UCF question is, I do think that there's going to be I think there's not going to be as much movement around the power conferences as some may think. But I do think that there could be quite a bit of movement around the group of the so-called group of 5 conferences. And, you know, the American is sitting in a very good position right now where they have a good television contract with Disney. They have their brand is growing nationally. They have been the representative from the group of 5 conferences in the New Year's 6 bowl games more than any other conference.
Right.
I think
Cincinnati, Memphis. Yep.
Yeah. Cincinnati, Memphis, UCF twice, 3 times if you include 2013 in the BCS bowls. Houston and have accounted for themselves quite well. Remember, Houston beat Florida State in the Peach Bowl. That was a good moment for the conference. They're in a position where they could add a team or 2 or 3 that could really raise the profile and make people sit up and think, okay, maybe this really is a power level conference in terms of on the field. The difference is the TV contracts between the major conferences and the American are just they're just that much different.
Yeah.
It's still going the deck is still stacked against them.
Mm-hmm.
And so then the question is there a conference that whose current members think that adding a UCF, adding a Cincinnati, adding a Memphis would increase everyone's piece of the pie rather than, adding another mouth to feed. And
I don't see the SEC and ACC being welcoming of any of those schools, really.
See, I don't see it.
I say I don't because I think
okay.
Even in Florida, the ACC already got Miami and Florida State,
right?
And then Florida is not. That's not going to fly.
Yeah,
that's not going to fly with the SEC.
And I'm not 100% familiar with the membership voting structures in the bylaws of those conference, but I know that at least one of them you have to be unanimous.
Yeah.
And so if it's unanimous, the SEC, I think the SEC is unanimous.
But
and
the Big Ten, Big Ten makes no sense. I mean, I'm pretty sure Florida blocked Florida State and Miami any talks of them being in the SEC, so I don't see that changing. But like Big Ten's going to be, that's not a fit. The Pac-12 is definitely not a fit. So really the only power conference we're talking about here would be the Big 12.
Right. And the question
that's kind of a weird fit.
The question with the big, it is a Southern conference, although it's more Southwestern than Southern, right?
Less of a problem for football than other sports, by the way, because West Virginia's run into that too.
Yeah, but I think West Virginia is the reason why, whenever somebody writes a blog about Big 12 expansion, you hear Cincinnati lumped in there because Cincinnati's actually not that far from West Virginia.
Yep.
The question with the Big 12 is how do they negotiate the Texas problem, which is the Longhorn Network?
It's why Nebraska left.
Right. It's why Nebraska. It's why Colorado left. It's why, it almost caused the disintegration of that conference to begin with. I still think it could cause the disintegration of that conference. And I think it's pretty interesting that when the Big East became the American Athletic Conference, they moved the conference offices from Providence, Rhode Island to Dallas, Texas. Just did this past year. In fact, they're in the same building in Dallas as the college football playoff corporate offices are located. And to me, that signifies a very clear, a very clear shift for the American that they think that the future of the conference is in the South. And if you see Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas flirt with other places, there's already been a lot of grumblings about Nebraska being in the Big Ten. Got to remember one other thing about the Big Ten that people forget. The Big Ten is an academic league. And one of the requirements for membership is you have to be a member of the AAU, the American Association of Universities. Nebraska lost its AAU affiliation very shortly after joining the Big Ten. So they're kind of the redheaded stepchild in not to be the pun there with the Cornhuskers, but
right.
They're kind of already, getting the side eye from the folks in the Big Ten.
Well, at least they're keeping a low profile and not screaming at the conference or anything like that.
Yeah, when I saw those Scott Frost press conferences, we're like, this is Scott Frost unplugged, man. This is man, he is not thrilled with the folks at the Big Ten. I would not be surprised.
I'm grateful for it though. We got some Big Ten football because of it.
Yeah, well, I would not be surprised if Nebraska left the Big Ten and went, I don't know where they would go. Probably, I could see them going back to the Big 12, possibly. But, but how the universities handle their third tier media rights, because they don't pass them off to, they don't sign over all of their media rights to one company like, the SEC did with ESPN or the ACC did with ESPN or the Big Ten did with ESPN and Fox. Those third tier media rights are the province of the schools to figure out. And so they sign their own contracts independently. How that works out, is going to be a key factor in figuring out what the next step is for the Big 12. But the Big 12 schools, they still make a lot of money. They make a lot of money, but at the same time, it's clear that Texas and Oklahoma drive that bus. So how much are the other schools willing to deal with that in the next round of negotiations? That's another question. It's very intriguing. I could see all kinds of stuff happening. I could see nothing happening at all. I mean, all the possibilities are on the table. The
messaging out of the press conferences for Gus and Terry were excellent. I thought, where they basically said, "Look, we got to think we're enough. If we don't think we're enough, no one else can think we're enough." Basically, and they're looking at it like, let's just create the best product possible, and if it happens, it happens. If not, then whatever. We're just gonna we're gonna shoot for that undefeated season, for that playoff spot. That's what our goal is anyway. So,
I mean, because you can't control anything more than that, right? The only things you can control are, do you win your conference? Yeah. At that point, and do you win all of your games? And to that extent, I think UCF has in-house done a very good job of that. They understand what the goals are at the start of the year, and then whatever else happens, let the chips fall where they may. We've been the beneficiary of it quite a few times. A couple of times we haven't been, but if you win your conference, the number one step is winning your conference, and that is UCF's number one goal every year. Dominate the American Athletic Conference. If you can dominate the conference the way Boise State has done in the Mountain West, then you're in that conversation year in and year out. And the folks around here, we get it. I mean, we can complain about the polls all we want, but at the end of the day, you can only control what you can control. So focus on that.
Is Gus out of there in 2 years? Is he taking an ACC job? Are we going to see Gus at some school like NC State in 2 years? That was the example I came up with the other day, but I mean, I that's my only concern with hiring Gus, is I feel like it could be, he's saying all the right things right now, but is he still viewing it as a platform maybe to get another shot at the SEC or something like that?
I don't know. It's a good question.
If he does, it'll be good for you guys.
I mean, you could see it go. You could see, again, it's one of those things you could see it go either way, right?
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if he stayed 5, 6, 7 years. He's 55. He's still relatively young. I wouldn't be surprised if he got a Godfather offer from somewhere else and left. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier, is, if you're UCF, you can't lament losing head coaches. I think it's perfectly fine as a UCF coach, as a UCF fan, to be like, okay, next man up. Yeah. All right, let's go. We got, and Terry, this is one thing that was really key, I thought, with Terry Mohajir's press conference, and Rob and Nick, I know you guys probably saw this, is Mohajir made it clear that, and I forget the exact quote, so I'm paraphrasing here, but he said that he wants to establish UCF as a program first, and that no one man can make or break the program.
I love that. Yeah.
And that's music to my ears.
Yeah.
Right. Because the institution is the thing that coaches and administrators want to be a part of. All right. If your program is so weak that when a guy leaves, you fall off, you don't have a strong enough program to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
So if you build the program and make it the place where, if a guy leaves, like if Gus leaves in 2 or 3 years, all right, who else wants to come in here and win? Anybody? That's what I like. Because, like we saw from this past year, there's no shortage of resumes coming into that inbox.
Well,
whenever an opening's there.
The other thing is, it's okay when we talk on a micro level about one school like this, but hey, go on a macro level. How many coaches in the FBS are on their 5th year at the same school right now? Probably not.
Not too many.
Not too many. I look back at this a couple years ago. and I looked at all the FBS coaches and what year they were in, and I think it's something. I think the number was about, I'm probably wrong, I think it was somewhere between 60, so I think it was about 70 or 75% of seniors at a program were on at least their second coach.
Wow.
Think about that in FBS, right?
Yeah.
There's a 3 in 4 chance basically that you will play for a minimum of 2 coaches if you become an FBS football player and you play and you redshirt and you play for 5 years, basically. That's the nature of the business now.
It is.
Yep. Yeah. And what I think is a good thing, a lot of people are like, oh, well, the coaches, they move all over the place and the players, they get stuck. Well, first of all, the players are wise to it. They get it. We saw with the reaction, with Josh Heupel and Coach Gus and Coach Malzahn coming in, the players get it. They understand that it's a business. They're much more business savvy these days than I think they were before. And the other thing is, we have the transfer portal, and I think that has opened up a sort of free agency market where like recruiting is like the draft, right? And the transfer portal has kind of become free agency now, where the players do have more agency about where they can go. Now, I think that's still all settling itself out. But I think that the more freedom that players have to find the situation that they want to be in, that they feel most comfortable in, the better. That's why I never fret about, oh my gosh, are these players going to transfer from UCF, or, like the coach has left is player X going to transfer. I'm like, if he wants to transfer, go ahead and transfer. Like, that's fine. I want guys who want to be here. I want guys who know, like what Terry Mohajir was saying, the no single person is bigger than the school.
I think I saw where UCF got a 4-star receiver committed while there was no coach.
Yeah. From Hawaii too.
Wow. So you probably knew Gabriel then.
Yeah. Titus Mokiao Atimalala is his name.
What a name. Say that again.
And Titus Mokiao Atimalala.
Okay, he said it the same way. I'm impressed.
Yeah, he is. By the way, he's going to be a problem. That kid, especially if with him hooking up with Dylan Gabriel, because
it's awesome.
What an incredible athlete! I can't wait to see what this kid's able to do. And also Brandon Johnson, who was at Tennessee and is a super senior grad student, transferred down from there. He's also a wide receiver. UCF's going to have it at their disposal. Who is the son of Charles Johnson, who is the former MLB catcher
for the Marlins?
For the Florida Marlins. That's right. 1997 World Series hero Charles Johnson. So, catching runs in the family apparently. So, again, the players are wise to this. They're smart.
Yeah,
they're smart. They get it.
Hey, and transfer portal's really opening up things too. So, Hey, Jeff, I literally, if you let me, I'll sit here and talk to you for like 4 more hours, man. But you've given us so much time already, man. I want you to like not dodge our calls if we ask you to come back on here, man.
Dude, anytime. Hey, anytime. I love it.
100% we will get you on before the season to do a preview of the Knights. So break down the 2021 season. So we definitely, but man, if you didn't learn something about the UCF football program on this podcast, you weren't listening, because we got all kinds of information from Jeff Sharon. But before we get out of here, Jeff, what would you like to promote? You got anything to promote over at
Black and Gold Banneret is our site. It's banner with an ET at the end. We are SB Nation's home for UCF. We're their team site covering UCF. We cover not just football and basketball, but all sports. We've got a great staff of people who do a number of different things. Eric Lopez, Brian Murphy, Danny Medina, Jeremy Brenner, who writes our daily night newsletter, where you get all the latest stuff, all the latest daily news from the world of UCF sports. You can subscribe to it on our site. You can follow us on Twitter at UCF_Banneret, and on Facebook at Facebook.com/Black Black and Gold Banneret. And you can follow me on Twitter at Jeff_Sharon.
Hey,
Awesome.
fantastic. Definitely learned a ton about UCF today. Great episode. We really appreciate you coming on, Jeff. Thanks a lot.
Nick and Rob, thank you so much for having me. Hopefully I can get both of you guys over here for a game at some point soon, because we missed having a full bounce house this past year. Hopefully we'll have one in the fall of 2021. So everybody, please be safe. Wear a mask. If you can get the vaccine, make sure you get it, because football season's at stake here.
It's about football season, man. That's a priority.
We got to get back to normal by football season.
Got to.
It's a great goal. We support that. Here at American Football Stories. All right. Hey, thanks a lot, Jeff. Signing off.
Thanks, Ellis.
Bye.
Thanks, Jeff.
American Football Stories is brought to you by Coach Paint. Coach Paint is a great tool that allows us to add graphics to player highlight clips similar to the graphics you see on TV. Coach Paint offers the ability to clearly tell a straight video while increasing retention of information in a shorter amount of time. Up your game with Coach Paint today.
Thank you for listening to American Football Stories podcast. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, American Football Stories. We are working to grow our network on YouTube and we'd love to have you subscribe. You can find us also on Apple Podcasts, on Twitter at American FB Story, and on our website, AmericanFootballStories.com. I am Robert Parker. My co-host is Nick Knudsen. This has been another episode of American Football Stories.